Welcome back into Eye on Agriculture. I'm Britton Rucker. We are talking about a critical issue in the cattle feeding industry today. That's rising death loss. Over the past 30 years, mortality trends have shifted in ways producers and researchers are still working to understand. Joining us now is Justin Wagner, beef system specialist with Kansas State University, to break down what's changed, what's driving these losses, and what it means for the future of cattle feeding. Justin, how has the overall death loss in the cattle feeding industry changed over the past 3 decades?
So, Britton, what we've really documented within our Focus on Feedlot data set at Kansas State University is we've seen an increase in feedlot mortality or death loss rates really starting in the mid-1990s and all the way to present days. So in the early 1990s, average feedlot mortality rates were actually less than 1%. And what we're seeing in the industry today is feedlot death rates that would be in excess of 2% for both steers and heifers in most of our monthly closeouts.
Now, what data or even trends stand out to you the most when compared to death loss rates from the 1990s to today?
So interestingly enough, we looked at this data from several different perspectives. So really the first step was to just gain a understanding of the data and how those trends have changed over time. And so what we observed was from the mid-1990s to 2003, so the early 2000s, death loss was increasing. Then from the period from 2004 to 2014, what we saw was death loss trends were really relatively flat. And then we saw those begin to increase again as we got from 2014 to really 2024. And so it's really interesting to see how those trends have changed over time across the time span there of those 3 decades. But we also looked at factors such as closeout month and days on feed as well. And so one of the interesting trends that I think we picked up in this data set was that feedlot death loss and mortality rates are seasonal. So feedlot mortality rates tend to be lowest in the fall for both steers and heifers, and then steadily increase as we get into the spring months. We also picked up an interesting difference between steers and heifers. So heifer death loss was actually higher than our steers in the months of May, June, and July. So those traditional summer months, if you will, for cattle on feed.
And Justin, I mean, cattle have changed in 30 years. Are heavier replacement weights or even faster growth expectations contributing to higher mortality?
Yeah, so great question, Britton. So you're absolutely right. So cattle have changed tremendously in the last 30 years. And so although we didn't specifically look at feedlot exit weights or necessarily performance in our data set, we did evaluate the relationship between days on feed. Essentially asking the question, as we increase days on feed, does that increase the relative mortality rates within the feedlot industry? And the answer to that question is yes, it does. So, but interestingly enough, the relationship with days on feed gives us some indication that days on feed only accounts for about 50 to 60% of the response that we see in feedlot mortality rates. So really what I think that tells us is feedlot death loss is a function of increasing days on feed, but there's also some other factors at play here as well.
So how much of today's death loss can be contributed and linked to health issues like respiratory disease or even digestive disorders?
So we obviously know that those are a factor at play in feedlot mortality rates. Unfortunately, with the data that we collect at K-State, we just simply can't parse it out to that level. We don't have that level of detail in the data that we collect. So we certainly know that those factors are underlying, but we just don't have the information within this data set to be able to evaluate that.
And now, Justin, we are moving into some weather extremes. I mean, it is stinking cold and we're going to get snow and ice. Are weather extremes, heat stress, or even severe cold like we're going into more of a factor now than even in past decades?
So it's really hard to overlay the data set that we have with those environmental stressors. And we certainly know that environment is a factor, right? You mentioned cold stress, you mentioned heat stress. I think one of the areas that we do get some indication that it is certainly a factor is if you just think about the impact of heat stress on heifers, especially during those summer months. So I think in our data, we are beginning to be able to see some of those responses, but we really just don't have the level of detail within our data to be able to really evaluate any deeper into that information and really get to the answer to that question.
And not only has cattle changed over the past 30 years, the tools have changed. The management strategies have changed. What tools are feed yards using today that's helped kind of reduce loss?
Yeah, so I think this trend is something that both academia as well as the private industry is certainly aware of. So there's a number of different, I'll call them management strategies, microbial therapies, even probiotics are all an active area of research within the feedlot industry, really to try to combat the increase in death loss and mortality that we've seen in the modern cattle feeding industry.
Now, looking ahead, what areas of research or innovation could make the biggest impact in lowering death loss in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really as you get into evaluating, what technologies could be the most impactful. That's really difficult to put a finger on or to point to one specific technology, in my opinion, that could be really instrumental in moving death loss down or advancing this issue in terms of our understanding of feedlot death loss. And so, really, for myself and maybe some others, I actually think it's going to be not one technology, but if possible, maybe several technologies as we look at better understanding of cattle death loss trends and how that the work that we're doing here today may carry over into management strategies. If we look at some of the other active areas of research that I mentioned as well, in terms of those antimicrobial therapies, the timing of those therapies, as well as other factors that kind of point to just that overall sense of cattle health and well-being. Probiotics, nutrition programs, all of those are certainly going to be a factor. So I really think it's multifactorial rather than just one specific technology that would be instrumental in maybe reducing death loss substantially within the feedlot industry.
Well, Justin, as always, thanks so much for coming on